A boy abandoned in the cold, homeless night. A hungry stray dog wandering. Two lost creatures, seemingly unrelated to each other. But fate has arranged a meeting that changes everything. Why won't a stray dog leave when it could leave the boy and save itself? What makes it willing to face storms, hunger, and danger just to protect a stranger? But this is more than just a story of survival. It's a story of loyalty, connection, and a miracle that you have to see to believe. Before we continue, comment where in the world are you watching this video from? And if you believe in heartwarming stories, don't forget to subscribe now, because tomorrow there's a special story waiting for you. The sunset over the Montana countryside leaves streaks of fiery orange across the sky. The wheat fields stretched out into the distance, swaying in the gentle breeze, like endless golden waves on a vast ocean. The air was quiet, except for the chirping of insects in the fading light. But amid the peaceful beauty, something was wrong. On the side of a dusty dirt road, among the tall grass, a small boy huddled. His oversized jacket covered his skinny body, his small hands trembling with cold. His face was dirty, with streaks of dried tears on his dirty cheeks. His pale blue eyes glistened in the evening light, not with hope, but with deep fear. Noah had been abandoned. No one answered his muffled sobs. No one stopped to ask why a child was out there. No one. He waited, waiting for someone to come back, waiting for someone, anyone, to take his hand and tell him it was all a mistake. But his eyes grew blank as darkness fell. Have you ever felt completely abandoned, like the world had forgotten you? The boy tried to suppress his fear, but his empty stomach reminded him that he hadn't eaten all day. The loneliness squeezed his every breath. But then, in the eerie silence of the deserted countryside, a small sound rang out. Rustle. Noah froze. He held his breath, his eyes scanning the tall grass in panic. Was someone there? Or worse, was something there? A shadow emerged silently from the edge of the woods. It wasn't human. It was another creature, a dog. But this wasn't just any dog. Its golden fur was caked with dirt, matted in clumps from weeks of wandering. Ribs bulged prominently beneath the sparse fur, the sign of a creature that had gone too long without food. But what was most striking was not its lean body, but its eyes. Deep brown eyes, filled with exhaustion, but also something else. Something familiar. Noah held his breath. He had seen that look before, in his reflection. He and this dog, they had both been abandoned. Have you ever met someone who, from the first moment, you knew they had the same pain as you? The dog stood there, just a few feet away from the boy. It didn't bark, it didn't growl. It just looked as if it was assessing him, or perhaps trying to understand why fate had brought these two lonely creatures together. Noah didn't move either. He wasn't afraid, but he didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to reach out, to touch the rough fur. But would it attack? Would it leave? A cold wind blew by, rustling the tall grass. Noah shivered, pulling his coat closer to him. The dog saw it. A second, 2 seconds, and then something strange happened. The Labrador took a step forward. It didn't leave. It didn't growl. It chose to stay. Noah held his breath as it slowly moved closer, eyes still fixed on him. And then, when the distance was only an arm's length, the dog gently lowered its head. It didn't do anything. It just sat down right in front of him, its rough fur brushing against Noah's small legs. Why would a stray dog, hungry and exhausted, choose to stay with a child it had never met? Why? Out of the hundreds of paths it could have taken, the thousands of directions it could have turned, did it choose to come to Noah? Maybe. Just maybe. It was also searching for what the boy was desperately longing for. Noah hesitantly reached out. His small fingers trembled as they touched the dog's rough fur. And as his fingertips touched that fur, something in his heart quivered. It felt as if for the first time today, he was no longer completely alone. The dog still didn't move. It let the boy touch it, let him feel the warmth of another living being. Then suddenly, as if a decision had been made, it stood up and turned its head toward the dim path ahead. 1 step, 2 steps. Then it stopped and turned its head to look at the boy. Noah swallowed. His legs were numb from sitting for so long, but he didn't care. No one came back for him. No one came to take him home. But right now, the boy knew he had a choice. Stay, wait in despair, or stand up, walk toward the uncertain, but possibly miraculous. He took a deep breath. Then, without a word, Noah tightened his old coat and followed the dog. Maybe he didn't know where he was going. Maybe he didn't know what was going to happen. But he knew one thing. He was no longer alone. And so the journey began. Noah hesitated. He stood still, looking at the skinny Labrador in front of him. The evening wind blew, ruffling the boy's dirty hair. The dog was still looking at him, its gaze unwavering. No pressure, no threat, just a silent expectation. Then it turned and walked slowly, as if it had made up its mind. But after a few steps, it stopped and looked back. Noah blinked. This dog was waiting for him. His mind told him not to follow. He didn't know where this dog came from. It could lead him deeper into the wilderness. It could be trying to trick him into an even scarier place. But what other choice did he have? He didn't know where he was. He didn't know where to go. And most importantly, he had no one. Again, his stomach churned, reminding him that he was hungry. He glanced at the dog again. It was still there, waiting. Could it be that it was lonely too? Noah bit his lip, his small hands tightening around the loose flaps of his coat. Then he walked. Not fast, not sure, but each step carried a vague determination, a determination that, at least, he would not be alone anymore. The Labrador, whom Noah began to call Buddy in his head, led him down the dirt road, through the tall grass, deeper into the wilderness. The sky was darkening. Gray clouds were gathering, signaling an approaching storm. Noah felt the cold seeping through his frayed coat. He shivered, but kept walking, following Buddy. Then, he realized something. This dog wasn't just wandering. It was leading him somewhere. Noah hesitated, looking around. The wheat field was now giving way to a small forest, where the tall trees provided a natural shield against the strong wind. And then Buddy stopped. In front of them, nestled between the trees, was an abandoned shack. Noah's eyes widened. The wood on the roof was rotten. The walls were stained with age. But it was a shelter. Buddy slipped through the crack in the door and disappeared inside. A second later, it poked its head out, looking at Noah as if urging him to follow. Should Noah trust this dog? He knew very well that not everything was as it seemed. Life had taught him that trusting too easily could lead to hurt. But when he looked back, saw the dark sky, heard the wind howl harder, and felt the cold seep into his bones, he knew he had no choice. He stepped inside. The inside of the shed was dark, but at least it provided some protection from the wind. A few weak rays of light filtered down from the cracks in the roof, allowing Noah to see around him. Buddy had curled up in a corner, his brown eyes gleaming in the darkness. Noah sat down, pulling his jacket closer. But no matter how hard he tried, the cold wouldn't leave him. He shivered, hugging his knees. The feeling of loneliness began to grip him once more. Then, something unexpected happened. Buddy, after a moment of observation, got up and walked closer. Noah tensed, but instead of doing anything scary, Buddy just gently lay down next to him, his thin body pressed against his legs. A warm feeling spread through him. Noah looked up at the dog. It had no obligation to help him. It could have slept alone. It could have ignored him. But no, it chose to stay with him. Why? Was it because Buddy had felt lonely? Was it because it had been abandoned, like him? Noah took a shaky breath, then gently reached out and placed his hand on Buddy's dirty fur. The dog didn't flinch. It just shivered under the touch. And then, for the first time that day, Noah felt safe. Not because of the old shack, not because the wind had stopped howling, but because he was no longer alone. The night deepened, the sky darkening like a curtain covering the world. Outside, the storm was approaching, thunder rumbling in the distance. Noah closed his eyes, trying to fall asleep, but his stomach growled painfully. He needed food, but he seemed to understand. He raised his head, sniffed the air, and stood up. Without hesitation, he quietly walked toward the door, gently pushing it open with his nose. Noah sat up. "Hey, where are you going?" he whispered, worried that Buddy would leave. But Buddy only glanced at him, then disappeared into the night. Noah held his breath. He didn't want to be alone, but he couldn't follow him out into the storm either. He could only wait. Time passed slowly. Each second stretched out like an eternity. And then, Russell. Buddy returned. But he didn't return empty-handed. In his mouth was a stale sandwich, probably something someone had thrown away long ago. But right now, it wasn't just a morsel of food. It was a glimmer of hope. It placed the piece of bread in front of Noah, then stepped back, waiting. The boy's eyes widened, staring at the dog in disbelief. It had left just to find food for him? Noah blinked, a lump rising in his chest. No one had ever done this for him before. No one had ever cared if he was hungry. No one had ever tried to help him without asking for anything in return. But Buddy, a dog he had just met, had. Noah took the piece of cake, his little fingers shaking. Then he looked at Buddy. He tore the cake in half for him, half for Buddy. The dog looked at him, its brown eyes glinting in the darkness. Then, slowly, it lowered its head, eating the food the boy had shared. And that was the moment everything changed. From two abandoned creatures, they became family. The sky suddenly darkened. Heavy clouds covered the moon, swallowing the night sky in a grayish hue. The air felt stuffy, as if something was about to happen. Noah shivered. He tried to pull his frayed jacket closer, but he couldn't stop the cold from seeping into his flesh. But he stopped, ears pricked up, sniffing the air. He could feel the change in the wind, the instability in the sky. The storm was coming. And then, without warning, the rain poured down. The cold raindrops stung his skin like needles. The wind whipped, carrying with it the cold mist, causing the temperature to drop suddenly. Noah curled up, his little legs shaking. He had never felt so cold before. Buddy looked at him, his eyes worried. He knew that this boy couldn't continue walking in this rain. It scanned the forest, searching for shelter. But all it saw were trees and bushes. There was nowhere safe enough. The wind howled harder. The thunder rumbled, waking the sleeping forest. Noah tried to take another step, but his legs wobbled. He was too tired, too cold. He had no strength left to continue. Buddy rushed forward. Without hesitation, it pressed its warm body against the boy, like a living blanket trying to transmit warmth. Noah looked up at the dog, his blue eyes weary. But when he felt Buddy's warm breath, when its wet fur touched his cold flesh, something changed. He stopped shivering. Buddy didn't leave. It didn't run away from the storm. It chose to stay. Why? Why would a stray dog, who should only care about its survival, be willing to shelter a human child? Noah closed his eyes, his body relaxing. The storm was still raging outside, but at this moment, he knew he was no longer alone. The rain continued to pour down. The air was covered in a blanket of cold water, but Buddy lay still, shielding Noah. The thunder boomed like firecrackers, but he did not leave. He did not sleep. He did not dare close his eyes. He knew that if he fell asleep, Noah might never wake up again. But Buddy himself was exhausted. He had not eaten for days. His fur was soaked, his body shivering with cold. But he could not stop. Noah needed him. The rain lasted for hours. Lightning flashed across the black sky, illuminating the forest for a moment before darkness swallowed everything again. With each thunderclap, Noah jerked, clinging tighter to Buddy. But Buddy didn't flinch. He didn't know how long he sat there. He only knew that when he began to feel his eyes growing dim, when hunger and cold began to paralyze his body, the sky began to lighten. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, painting faint streaks of light on the ground. The storm had finally passed. The air was still damp, the ground was wet, but dawn had returned. Buddy slowly opened his eyes. His whole body ached. Every muscle ached from bracing himself through the storm all night. But the first thing he did was not stand up. He turned to Noah. The boy was still curled up beside him, his lips pale, but still breathing. Buddy licked his cheek, as if to make sure he was still alive. Noah stirred slightly. Then slowly, his blue eyes opened. The boy blinked, looking around in confusion. The storm was over. He felt warmth beside him. When he turned, Buddy was still there. The dog had stayed with him all night. It had sheltered him. It had protected him. Noah couldn't believe it. Why would it do that? No one had ever protected him before. No one had ever cared so much about him. But a dog, a creature with no reason to stay, had chosen to stay. He swallowed, then gently placed a small hand on Buddy's wet fur. The dog looked up at him, his deep brown eyes saying, "We're still alive." But Buddy knew that this boy couldn't stay here forever. The storm was only part of the problem. Noah needed a safe place. It stood up, shaking the water from its fur. Then it turned its head, sniffing the air. There was something nearby, a scent it hadn't noticed before. People, maybe a farm, maybe a house. Whatever it was its only chance. Buddy looked at Noah. It barked softly, then started walking. But after a few steps, it stopped and turned its head to look at the boy, as if to say, "Come on, don't give up." Noah pursed his lips. He felt weak, tired, but he knew he couldn't sit here forever. Buddy had sheltered him all night. Now it was his turn to trust him. He took a deep breath, then stood. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he wouldn't be going alone. And so, an abandoned boy and a stray dog walked on. No looking back, no hesitation, only faith, and a hope that, at the end of this road, a miracle awaits. The sun rose from the horizon, casting its first rays of light after a long, stormy night. Raindrops still lingered on the branches, reflecting the sunlight like sparkling gems. The air was quiet, but Noah's heart still beat with the echoes of last night's storm. He was exhausted. His little legs were weak, but Buddy kept walking. The Labrador didn't slow down, even though he was exhausted. He had a purpose. He had carried the boy through the storm. Now he had to find a safe place for him. Then Noah saw it. Between the bare trees, a small house appeared in the dawn light. Warm yellow light poured from the window, and a thin column of smoke rose from the chimney, blending into the morning sky. Noah stopped. He couldn't believe his eyes. For the first time in days, he saw signs of humans. Buddy saw it too. It raised its head, its eyes flashing with hope. Without hesitation, it sped up. Buddy's bark echoed through the quiet, shattering the stillness of the morning. It barked loudly, repeatedly, a cry for help. The wooden door swung open. A middle-aged man appeared, his hair graying, his face stern, but his eyes filled with concern. He frowned when he saw Buddy, a skinny, dirty, storm-soaked dog. But then, as his gaze shifted back, he froze. Noah stood there, small, cold, shivering. The two faced each other for a moment of silence. Then, without hesitation, the man rushed out. He knelt before Noah, his strong but gentle hands on the boy's shoulders. "Oh my God." His voice was hoarse with emotion. Where did you come from?" Noah couldn't answer. He didn't know what to say. But when he looked down at Buddy, the dog standing next to him, panting but determined, he knew he hadn't come here alone. Buddy had led him here. He hadn't abandoned him. The man looked at the two creatures before him, a small boy and a stray dog, both lost, exhausted, but clinging to each other to survive. Slowly, he reached out, gently wiping the tears from Noah's cheeks. "You're okay." His voice was deep. "I won't leave you alone again." The words, simple yet powerful, made Noah's heart clench. For the first time in his life, someone had said those words to him. Not alone anymore. The boy couldn't help it. He threw himself into the man's arms, clinging to him, as if he let go, everything would disappear. He held him, holding him tight, as if protecting something precious. But he stood still for a moment, watching. Then, as if he understood that Noah was safe, he relaxed. For the first time in days, he collapsed to the ground, exhausted. Noah was taken to the hospital soon after. He was malnourished and exhausted, but he would be fine. Buddy, the dog who had fought so long to protect Noah, was also being cared for. When the vet examined him, they realized a heartbreaking truth. Buddy was more than just a stray. Judging by the marks on his neck, he had once had an owner. But someone had abandoned him, just as someone had abandoned Noah. Two lost souls had found each other in their loneliness. And now, they had found a place to belong. The man, James Carter, a reclusive ex-soldier, took Noah home. He wasn't an easy man to talk to, but there was something in the boy's eyes that made it impossible to turn away. Noah didn't say much in the early days, but every night he would sit quietly next to Buddy, placing his hand on his golden fur as a silent thank you. Buddy didn't need words either. He just needed to know that Noah was safe, that he had done the right thing. And then, one day, James sat down next to Noah, patting him on the shoulder. "Do you want to stay here?" Noah looked up, his eyes wide. Stay? He had never had a place to call home. No one had ever asked him that question. He looked at Buddy. The dog was looking at him too. A moment of silence passed. Then Noah nodded. No need to think. No need to hesitate. He knew this was where he belonged. And so, a new family was born. It didn't end there. Noah still had to learn to trust. Buddy still needed time to heal. And James, a man who believed he would spend the rest of his life alone, had to learn to open up to the two creatures fate had brought him. But one thing was certain. They would no longer be alone. Buddy no longer wandered. Noah no longer shivered in the dark. And James, for the first time in years, had found something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. Buddy had found Noah in the storm. Noah had followed Buddy, despite his fears. And James, a stranger, was the one they needed to find. Was it a coincidence? Or is there something bigger going on? Have you ever met someone, and you knew from the moment you met them that they would change your life forever? Sometimes, strangers become the family we've always wanted. And sometimes, miracles don't come as we imagine. It may come in the form of a lost boy, or a loyal dog, or a man who has lost all faith in life. But when they find each other, a new story begins. Do you want to know what happens next? Can Noah find himself again? Can Buddy learn to trust people again? And can James heal the wounds of the past? Stay tuned, because this is just the first chapter of an amazing journey. Life sometimes brings cruel challenges, pushing us into the dark corners of loneliness and despair. But if this story has taught us anything, it is this. Even in the darkest night, there is always a light waiting at the end of the road. Noah and Buddy, two abandoned souls, lost in the storm of life. But it was in their weakest moment that they found each other. Not by words, not by any arrangement, but by the invisible connection of hearts searching for a reason to continue. What about you? Have you ever felt lost? Has someone or something appeared and changed your life suddenly? If so, leave a number from 0 to 10 to rate this story. We want to know how much magic you feel in this journey. And if you believe that kindness, loyalty, and love can change fate, please like to spread this message to more people. Your one share could inspire someone out there, someone who needs a ray of light in their darkness. If you want to continue on this emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the next story, one that might touch your heart in ways you never imagined. We'll see you again very soon in another magical story. Are you ready?